Hello everyone, and welcome to the eFinancialCareers 2024 Looking Forward webinar. This is the third year we've run such a webinar, and we hope you find it at least as exciting and as insightful as you have in previous years. My name is Zeno, and I'll be your host today. We'll be speaking to a number of people within eFinancialCareers about the state of the hiring market after a turbulent 2023, as well as what we can hope for and expect from 2024. Our first guest is our CEO here at eFinancialCareers, Pete Healy. Pete, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Pleased to be here.
That's great. I was hoping to talk to you mostly about 2024 today, but I think it's impossible to talk about 2024 without looking at 2023. How was it?
It's been a really interesting market. I mean, obviously we've seen the macroeconomic conditions worsen with persistent inflation, rising rates, and then impacts on GDP numbers. What we've seen is obviously the uncertainty in the market through the mini financial crisis that happened in the US, and then into the situation with Credit Suisse. What that has done is really start to impact hiring plans over the course of the year. And what I think is interesting is that typically when you see a slowdown, it really the shift the shift in terms of the market tends to happen quite quickly, but we've seen that candidate expectations and client expectations in terms of employer expectations have really been at odds with each other. So whilst demand has dropped, we've not seen hiring become a lot easier because of that mismatch between candidate expectations and the employer expectations. We've also seen historically low churn in the market, and so those two together meant it's still been pretty hard to recruit, especially in key positions. We have started to see that ease through Q4, and it feels like there's been a bit of a correction in terms of candidate expectations through the end of Q3 and start of Q4. So there's a bit of a more kind of normal kind of market conditions that you'd expect in a downturn, where it's starting to get easier to hire.
So would you say that there are some indicators that things are getting back to normal, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. We're still, it's a really mixed bag out there, depending on kind of location and different brands. There are still some of the majors going through pretty significant restructuring and cuts, but then some of the other major institutions are hiring and growing. So it's a very mixed bag. There are a lot of clients, mid-level clients, who are just backfilling positions, and I think it's definitely too early to say the first half of 2024 is going to see a significant improvement. I think there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty through the first half of 2024. In terms of, I guess, what we'll look at the kind of macroeconomics, so GDP, inflation and rates. We'll also be looking at the interim reports and the reports of the PLCs to see, are they talking about hiring? Are they still going through reorgs as markers as to whether it's in the rear view mirror? But we certainly think the first half of 2024 is still going to be pretty uncertain. That said, there's some good data coming out of the US, but less so kind of Europe and Asia. So we're expecting there to probably be kind of a resurgence led by the US, but it's going to take probably longer in Europe and Asia.
It's interesting that you mentioned the majors. Of course, they're super heavyweight in the market. They drive things forward no matter what direction they go in. But maybe within or on a broader level, are there any sectors that are more resilient than others?
Yeah. It really depends on the market. I think if you look globally, we are seeing that there is resilience in technology. So whilst we're not at the levels of 2022 by any stretch of the imagination, there's still a level of resilience there. I think if you look at the UK market, we've certainly seen that there has been a rebound in fintech, information services and insurance. over to the US, we've certainly seen the buy side has been more resilient through the second half of the year. In Asia, private banking, wealth management, and some of those kind of corporate banking has been more resilient. And in particular in Asia, the local banks have been hiring more than, say, the Western or international institutions. So it's a definite mixed bag still, but there are pockets.
And I think the last thing I really want to ask you is in terms of DEI markers, and especially banks and other institutions looking to fill roles with people from, say, less advantageous social backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. Has that taken a pause throughout 2023, and do you think that'll continue?
No, I think diversity hiring, actually on the contrary, it's become more important, and we saw this actually through the back of the pandemic. When volumes are down, actually there's more room to focus on diversity hiring. Certainly through the end of 2021 and through most of 2022, we saw DEI hiring kind of go down on the list of priorities because everybody was just trying to hire in such volumes, and it became less of a priority. We've definitely seen through 2023 it's taken greater focus. So what we're seeing is, especially at some of the larger organisations, actually more examples of specific hiring teams that are focused on diversity hiring, and that seems to be having a positive impact on their results. You call out kind of socio-economic diversity. I think that's less of a priority from what we see. We see certainly globally gender is a priority, especially once you get beyond kind of more junior roles up into senior levels, where we know there's an issue there. And ethnic diversity is a big focus, and there it really depends on the location. So whether you're in North America, Europe, in Asia, what you see is actually, in some cases, places like Singapore, actually there's a focus on hiring Singaporean nationals, and we have some of that dynamic in the Middle East where hiring nationals is a priority. On the factor of socio-economic diversity, that seems to be less of a focus. I think everybody recognises it's a challenge. We'd love to see more organisations really focused on driving up, hiring from those from lower socio-economic groups. The data shows that it's a more of an acute problem, especially once you get into management positions within financial services. That there's a greater lack of socio-economic diversity than even ethnicity or gender. So it's a significant problem that, again, is driven by some pretty big systemic challenges, but we should try and address.
Thank you very much, Pete. Our next guest today is Rainey Gill, VP of Marketing here at eFinancialCareers. How are you today, Rainey?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking.
So we've just spoken to Pete quite a bit about 2024. I was hoping that with you, I could talk a bit more in depth about what we've seen in terms of the trends of 2023. To start with, in our bonus expectations report, based on our survey, we found that anywhere between 40 and 65% of people at major banks were looking to change jobs in 2024. What sort of pressure does that put on recruiters?
Absolutely, great question. Thank you, Zeno, for asking me. Yeah, so we published our end of year sort of bonus expectation report, and it clearly showed within specific banks, employees are looking to leave, and those banks in particular were sort of HSBC, SocGen, and Barclays. And actually, the banks where they showed sort of really strong loyalty was Bank of America and JP Morgan. JP Morgan has just won our ideal employer globally, so that could be one of the reasons why employees are less reluctant to move. And actually, Bank of America have reported some really phenomenal sales and trading revenue results, the greatest it's been in many, many years. However, there are distinct reasons why employees are looking to leave, and they include sort of poor bonus, lack of flexibility in terms of being able to work from home, and just sort of limited career opportunities too. And actually, our ideal employer, which was recently published, actually highlighted some really sort of important variables that matter to employees. They include sort of well-being initiatives, culture and integrity, compensation, of course, but also the ability to feel like they're bringing their best to work, so having a really strong sense of belonging. The issue you have where employees have so many of their employees wishing to move is that it causes sort of low morale, productivity drops, they're less likely to put their hands up for new projects, and then ultimately it can be really challenging to hire for those niche skills roles.
Thank you for that answer, Rainey. Our report also found that anywhere between 15 and 45% of those same people, those people at major banks, felt insecure about their jobs. Do you think that insecurity leads to people maybe moving in suboptimal conditions, less salary increase than expected, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You only have to look at the responses we got in our survey. Again, I'm referencing our end of year bonus report. Many of them from City. City is going through a major restructure. They're taking out many layers with regards to management. Also, we had respondents from UBS too, who are nervous about what's happening there, and obviously the merger with Credit Suisse too. Ongoing cuts definitely impact employees' morale and their ability to feel secure in their role, which does mean that they will look to move, and they will look to roles not paying what they previously were expecting, such as those 20-25% salary increases. They're being far more realistic now because they want to move to an environment where they do feel secure.
There was also a really clear divide in our report between people that were early in their career and more experienced, in terms of pretty much everything: bonus expectations, job security, likelihood of looking for a new job, even days in the office. Why do you think there's such a large divide?
Yeah, absolutely. And our survey highlighted that, actually. It was really interesting. It said that actually women are more likely to be looking for a new role in 2024. And actually, those based in Hong Kong and Singapore, again, more likely to look for a new role versus those employed in America or Europe too. And there was actually a really strong relationship between age and desire to move, with just 52% of those aged between 20 to 25 looking to move, and that increased to 73% for those that are 50 and over. Ageism is also felt as being something that's contributing to jobs insecurity and their wanting to and their motivation to move, and was named directly from those that responded to our survey based in Hong Kong, in Singapore too.
Thank you very much for that answer, Rainey. The last thing I really wanted to ask you was, how has the hiring process itself changed over the course of the last year?
There have been a number of variables that has changed in 2023, including the time it takes to hire. So we have seen that actually time to hire has increased to between 3 to 5 additional weeks, and there are a number of reasons for that. Candidates working in sales and marketing are more reluctant to leave because if they can hit targets where they're currently being employed, they're going to stick with that in this market climate. Also, sort of hybrid working, it's causing friction. Direct employers want candidates in the office more. They appreciate that face-to-face contact. However, candidates are resistant to working 5 days in person in the office. And actually still finding qualified candidates, especially sort of in tech roles in particular, is proving challenging too. And this is also compounded by the lack of motivation to be in the office. And then finally, growing interview pools, more interview rounds, greater selectivity and understaffing within HR teams is causing everything to move slower. Candidates are no longer receiving those plus 25% salary increases which they did in post-COVID. There is also sort of misalignment with graduates. They're looking for really high salaries with no experience, and direct employers, they just simply don't have the budgets. And also sort of employer brand, it's becoming more critical than ever. And there are a number of initiatives our customers, our clients are using to amplify their employer brand. That includes sort of content marketing, white paper, leadership content, also online advertising, so making their brand visible in all of the communities that really matter to candidates. And also flexible working and a positive culture. They're really sort of highlighting these through company description, company profiles, through their own marketing and branding. And then finally, inclusivity and really robust and meaningful DEI policies and standards are also being amplified and supporting their employer value proposition.
Thank you very much, Rady, for your time. Our next guest today is Nick Buckland, eFinancialCareers VP of US Sales. How are you, Nick?
Very well, thanks. And how are you?
I'm very well. He's the first person to ask me that. And I want to know, how are things in the US?
Well, it's definitely been challenging. Recruiters are managing changes across talent acquisition structures alongside big company-wide announcements and all the uncertainty that creates within teams. There have been bright spots, however, so job cuts have not been across the board, but it's hard to escape the feeling of uncertainty and a chill across the marketplace. And although the supply of candidates has increased, recruiters are reporting that hiring remains challenging. One of the reasons being that hiring managers are often combining required skill sets into one job description to get under headcount budgets, and that makes finding that ideal candidate yet harder still. The other feedback we're getting is that the change in market conditions is starting to have an impact on candidate expectations, which is probably a welcome change since the overheated period of the last 18 months or so prior to 2023. And hopefully that bodes well for the long-term health of the market.
All right, Nick, well, that's good to know. Not great to know, but definitely good to know. But what would you say that American recruiters and American companies are doing differently to the rest of the world?
American optimism does shine through our conversations, which is of course pleasing. Opinion is mixed on when the recovery will arrive. There seems to be a consensus on that there will be a recovery, but in 2024. But of course, the big question as to when that happens is very much still up in the air. Where the US stands out is in the resilience of the underlying economy, which has certainly confounded expectations for many commentators in 2023. And I think that's perhaps feeding through into some of the conversations that we're having. Recruiters are also reporting that they're able to spend a bit more time focusing again on DEI hiring practices, which is welcome after some of the overheated hiring prior to 2023, which really forced teams to get people through the door as opposed to get into the deeper work about how to address diversity and those challenges. Targets often are viewed as driving some unintended behaviours. The deeper or more meaningful results come from the creation and promotion of an attractive employer brand, but also education and training internally, and leveraging data sources like eFinancialCareers has been cited as being particularly helpful in this respect.
Thank you very much, Nick. The last thing I wanted to ask you is about our bonus expectations report. We found that financiers in New York were spending some of the least time in the office compared to other major financial centres, but at the same time they had some of the highest levels of dissatisfaction of spending time in the office. Why do you think that is?
It's a difficult question to answer. CEOs of leading US banks, it's been well noted, have been very vocal about their desire for employees to come back into the office 4-5 days a week. This isn't reflected in the wants and needs of the wider employee workforce, who've become really quite enamoured with the benefits of hybrid and flexible working. It's shaping up, I think, to be one of the key debates of our time in terms of the future of work. I also think it can increasingly be seen through the lens of diversity. So our ideal employer research clearly shows how important hybrid working is for many groups. But we see that employees with perhaps greater caring responsibilities or particularly in lower salary brackets benefit disproportionately from the benefits of hybrid working. And these perhaps are items and topics that the average male CEO doesn't have to consider on a daily basis.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was great. Our next guest is Rob Eade, VP of UK Sales here at eFinancialCareers. How are things, Rob?
Very well, thank you.
Rob, what I really wanted to ask you is about attitudes. How are attitudes changing? After 2023, things can't be the same.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what we've seen this year is that there have been fewer recruitment needs, so organisations have been able to spend more time on their employer brand initiatives. Having said that, that's been quite difficult for all of these organisations. You know, as they've returned to work, hybrid working, flexible working, they're not necessarily aligned yet within organisations, within country specific as well. And off the back of that, what we're seeing is that it's proving quite difficult to come up with a specific plan that the whole business is aligned to. That's been very much sort of pinpointed from our ideal employer survey. And what we saw there was that certain organisations, whilst being the most sought after organisations in the world, they've still got a lot of work to do within specific metrics such as DEI or rewarding careers.
All right, thank you very much for that. Looking back, what would you say were some of the biggest trends over the course of the last 12 months?
Yeah, good question. I think what we've noticed is that usually in a recruitment marketing cycle, it can take 5 years to see the top and the bottom of a market. We've seen that 5-year cycle in a 12-month period, certainly going from 22 to 23. 22 very much overly optimistic businesses, recruiting very heavily post-pandemic, and then in 23 the markets turn and all of a sudden we're having to make a number of redundancies. And I think we can see that at our end very much from the data side of things. So we can now see that there are 20% less recruiters using our platform, but 50% more candidates in the market. So that's suggesting that the staffing agencies have had to make cuts, and similarly because their clients have made cuts also, and therefore we're seeing that the increase in candidates coming to the site.
If we take these trends, these last 12 months, and we extrapolate them, it won't be a perfect forecast, but what are we forecasting?
I would certainly hope that the markets will be in a more positive place than we've seen this year. One thing that we've definitely seen a lack of this year is natural attrition. Following the pandemic, we've seen a lot of businesses hiring, and they were also because there was a significant lack of candidates last year. A lot of those candidates were able to get significant pay increases, sometimes upwards of 30% or so. So those guys aren't going to be moving anytime soon. So what we're likely to see is 2025, 2026, before we start seeing the levels of attrition that we saw were naturally occurring in the market before the pandemic. So I think next year we would certainly be seeing more recruitment activity than we saw this year, but perhaps not until sort of after the Q2, H2 period.
Thank you very much for watching with us today. Our last guest today is eFinancialCareers' Head of APAC, Ben Scuffins. How are you today, Ben?
I'm very well, thank you, Zedo. Thank you for inviting me on.
Very happy to. So, Ben, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what's Asia doing differently to the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, I think when we talk about Asia, we're predominantly talking about Hong Kong and Singapore financial services recruitment. We also need to consider that both financial centres are small job markets in the likes of London and New York, whereby Singapore is often viewed more as a private banking hub and therefore recruiters and candidates behave accordingly. Relationships are everything. Candidates shouldn't rely purely on CVs and cover letters. They need to get in front of recruiters. They need to get in front of hiring managers. It's absolutely crucial. As part of this, recruiters like and prefer to work face-to-face. Candidates shouldn't solely rely on video. It's more difficult to build genuine relationships. In Asia, there's also a real emphasis on referrals. Asian cities maintain a much closer, more village-like feel, if you like, whereby recruiters, hiring managers, candidates are significantly more networked than their peers in Europe and the US. I think there's also considerations as well for overseas candidates as well. So therefore, overseas candidates need to make sure that they also take the trip out and they're in front of recruiters and hiring managers. It really helps to build that relationship, and it's really appreciated again by hiring managers and recruiters. Now, this is especially more acute in Singapore, whereby recruiters have the additional governance of the new Compass framework that's recently been rolled out, and therefore they'll likely have a Singaporean talent first mindset. So again, being here in person is really crucial to help develop that relationship, because even though they might have that Singaporean talent first mindset, there are still some very well documented skill shortages in Singapore that need to be addressed. So there's still a level of overseas hiring that is taking place. The last thing that I'd like to point out, that again, kind of going back to the nature of the fact that both Hong Kong and Singapore are relatively small markets, recruiters and hiring managers are more likely to notice poor candidate behavior at the same time. So again, a recommendation to candidates is not to multi-apply, especially to the same organizations, because it'll get flagged and candidates will develop a poor reputation very quickly.
All right, Ben, thank you very much. The second thing I wanted to ask you is based on our bonus expectation report. We found that people in Asia are much more pessimistic about their bonuses than pretty much every other major market. Why do you think that is?
The eFinancialCareers bonus expectation report, just for clarification, showed that expectations in Singapore to be flat year on year, but actually Hong Kong, the thinking was that it might be down as up to 6% year on year. So I think we need to ask ourselves why. And I think there are a number of different reasons. There's a fundamental lack of deal flow fees, which are resulting in budgets being missed consistently throughout 2023. There's also been swelling costs that have been widely reported, both in Hong Kong and in Singapore. And as a result, some businesses are really hurting, as I say, with the budgets consistently being missed. Having said that, it's not all doom and gloom. Junior bankers are anticipating that 24 will be a much better year than 23, given that 23 was also a challenging year for bonuses. 3 was whereby junior staff especially were affected by a reduced bonus pool.
Also from our bonus expectations report, which is really, it's the bonus and job market expectation report, we also found that Asian bankers in Singapore and Hong Kong felt the most job insecure. Why do you think that is? And is that a good thing for anyone involved?
It's certainly an interesting dynamic. Firstly, I don't think it's ever a good thing. It's just an indicator of a real uncertain market. Just for clarity, 44% of respondents in Hong Kong felt insecure about their employment versus a whopping 46% in Singapore, which is way above the global average. And we believe there are a few market dynamics that are really pushing this sentiment. So firstly, we're currently in a very tough regional market. Budgets are consistently not being met, which is something that we've already addressed. In addition to this, in 2023, a number of the main volume financial institutions have announced major restructures, including the likes of Citi, HSBC and Standard Chartered, many of which processes are still ongoing, which again is fueling the insecurity sentiment. And then lastly, financial services in Hong Kong and Singapore has a long-standing reputation for overcutting in downturns and overhiring when the conditions are more favourable. And I believe that all of these things coming together are really driving the job insecurity numbers within Hong Kong and Singapore.
Thank you, Ben. That was our last guest for this year's Looking Forward webinar. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed making it, and we wish you all a very good 2024. Thank you.